पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौः शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिराप शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौः शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
We can sing to me Brahma Ramakrishna on page 37.
Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmaheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is escape from God. Now, the title is not meant to suggest that we are being chased by God and then we somehow have to, at least some of us are trying to escape God's clutches. It's definitely not in that sense. It's in the sense that even those amongst us who at one level feel attracted to the spiritual ideal, at one level feel we need to have some kind of a connection with that higher principle or God, whichever way we conceive of that divine being. So even at the one level we feel we need to establish some kind of connection, another part of our being is trying to run away from it. So it's a complex situation. We want to be connected consciously, but unconsciously often we are doing everything we can not to be connected. To some extent, today's title was inspired by Eric Fromm's book, which came, I think, probably sometime in the 50s or 60s. And some of you may have read that. It's called Escape from Freedom. And one of the truths or one of the facts that he tries to establish in that book, and I think very persuasively, is about freedom. That while freedom is a value that we all seek, that all of us feel, I want to be free. And yet, even when we cherish freedom, even when we seek after freedom, a part of us is actually running away from freedom, trying to escape freedom, trying not to want it. And the reason, he says, is that while the idea of being free is so enticing, so wonderful, being free also involves being responsible. Being free also involves accepting the possibility of failure. It's like this. If you're not free and something goes wrong, you always have an excuse. Well, I didn't have any choice. But when you are free, you have a choice. And if you have a choice, then there is the choice to fail. So if something goes wrong and you fail, you have no one to blame because you had the freedom to choose one way or the other. So a lot of us who are afraid of making a mistake, afraid of failure, would rather not be free so that we then don't have to take the responsibility. So that's the dilemma. The idea of being free is wonderful, but actual freedom involves responsibility and the possibility of failure. Something like that kind of a complex situation occurs in our spiritual life. While the idea of being enlightened, the idea of somehow being connected with the spiritual ideal is wonderful, a part of us is trying to not want it. And so that kind of dilemma is something that I would like to reflect on this morning. But I would like to begin with a story that I have mentioned on earlier occasion, but I think it sets the stage well for this reflection. And this is the story about an anecdote from Ramayana, the story of Rama's life. Most of us are familiar with the basic outline. We know that his wife Sita was kidnapped by this demon king named Ravana, and it was across the ocean, oftentimes identified with the present-day Sri Lanka. And so Rama and his brother Lakshmana go right up to the tip of southern India, and there is this ocean, a strip of ocean separating the two. And the only way that they can go across to the island where Sita is believed to have been taken is to build a bridge. And so we read in the Ramayana that he has this whole army of what is described as monkeys, and some of the scholars believe that it was probably the tribals living in that area which became mythologized into monkeys. In any case, so we read in the book that this soldiers, the monkey soldiers, in order to build the bridge, they didn't have the kind of technology we can boast of today. So, but they had faith. And so we see them picking up these huge rocks and taking the name of Rama. And some of you who have seen the TV version of Ramayana might remember this. So they take this Jai Shri Ram, they take the name of Rama and put it into the water, and these huge rocks float on water. And so that's how this bridge was built. And so we are told in that story. Now, clearly, this defies all laws of physics. We say, well, how would these rocks float on water? And it's not just that we can be skeptical about how it may have happened. Rama himself was standing by, watching this thing happening. Rama was like, this is not how it was supposed to be. So Rama was surprised too. But he recognized that every time they placed this stone on water, they uttered the Lord's name and put it. So he wanted to check it for himself, say that, is my name really so powerful? But of course, he didn't want to do it in front of everyone, so he just went to a secluded part of that beach. We are told he picked up a stone himself, and Rama himself says, Jai Shri Ram, and throws that stone in water. And the stone sinks, doesn't float. And Rama feels, oh, these soldiers have so much power in my name, while I myself uttered the name and didn't work. And then we are told Hanuman, his chief disciple, was standing behind it, unbeknownst to Rama, and he had noticed everything, he had seen everything. So that embarrassed Rama even more. Then Rama looks back and then looks at Hanuman. Then Hanuman goes to Rama and says, no, this is exactly how it was supposed to happen. And then Rama asks him, how so? And then Hanuman says, look, as long as the stone was in your hand, it was safe. As soon as it left your hand, what else could it do but sink? Well, that made Rama feel a little better, I suppose. But then that's how devotees of God, when we read an incident like this, and this is what then makes us think. This is how those who believe in God, those who have faith in God think, that so long as I'm connected with God, so long as I'm in God's hands, I'm safe. The moment that connection is lost, I'm going to sink. By sink here obviously means that our present experience of just the limitations of human existence, not just in terms of sickness, aging, or death at the physical level, or stress, anxiety, perpetual worry, from which very few people seem to be free from, if any. That if we are able to somehow remain connected with the divine, we will be free from these existential limitations that we labor under. But if we go away from God, then we are going to continue suffering. That's how a devotee of God thinks. And that's the basic for this escape from God. So if this is what we believe, then why is it that we don't want to be connected with God? Now, clearly, it's not as if that God wants us to go away. He doesn't want us to go away. It's we who want to escape from Him. And so there are two ways of looking at it. One way is people who are not instinctively attached to the spiritual ideal. In fact, who either see themselves as non-believers, or even if they don't see themselves as non-believers, religion is not necessarily high on their interest list or priority list. It's like, okay, we like religion, but there are other more important things to do in life. And we see that in the life of Ramakrishna, for instance. Sometimes Narendranath, who later became Vivekananda, he used to sometimes bring his friends along. And that's what we do. You go to a place, you like the place, and sometimes you say, hey, that's a nice place, why don't we go there? And so sometimes some of these young college students who used to go to meet Ramakrishna, and they liked being there, and so sometimes they would bring their friends along. And so we read. So Ramakrishna is sitting in the room, and these people bring their friends. And after a few minutes, these friends would start getting restless because all this God talk wasn't all that interesting. And so then they would get restless, and then they would tell Narendranath or whoever had brought them, hey, why don't you, if you want to sit here longer, you can. We should probably just go around and walk around and look at the temples and so on. And then, of course, then they would say, yeah, sure. Ramakrishna would say, yeah. And sometimes when Ramakrishna would notice that some of these people had just been brought by their friends, but were not really interested, he himself would say, why don't you just walk around the beautiful garden and look at the temples? And then he would tell his disciple, he said, don't force anybody to come, because if their heart is not in it, this might be more a torture than something that might benefit them. Now, that's not necessarily the case always. Sometimes you bring a friend and a friend likes it and says, oh, thank you for bringing me to such a great place. But sometimes it may not work, so you never know. But so that is one thing. That's how some of the people try to escape from all this God talk. They say, let me just go and do something else. There's one incident, and I'm sure many of you will have similar things to share from your own experience in life. I can tell you one thing that I remember from my college days. So I did my college in Bombay, and so one of my friends, is a very close friend of mine, he was a Catholic, and so he was, of course, his family had instructed. We were all staying in a hostel, and so his family said, you must attend Mass every Sunday. But where our college was located, so the nearest church, they had the Mass like morning, something like because they had, India, as many of you know, has so many languages, so the church had services in different languages. And I think the service in English was, I think, pretty early on, so maybe 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, I don't remember the date. But there was other services, and there was one service in Malayalam and Tamil in South Indian languages, which are around like 11:30, 12. Now, this friend of mine didn't understand any of those languages, but he didn't want to get up too early in life. And so he would go for this 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock service on Sunday, so he could leisurely get up, and then he could maybe tell his mom later on, well, I did attend. And even that service, obviously, he didn't want to sit through the whole thing. He doesn't understand a word of what's going on. So he would go like the final concluding few minutes when he can. And so he could honestly tell his mom that, well, I did go to Mass. Now, he's still a good friend of mine now. He's moved over to Canada, so I do see him now and then. And he'll be horrified if he knew that I've been telling this story. I hope he's not watching the live streaming of this one. So, again, the idea was this, that he obviously recognized some good, some value in attending Mass. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone at all. At the same time, there wasn't that kind of thing that, oh, this is what I want to do. So there was a way of kind of getting away from it and also being there. So that's one of the ways people try to escape. But what about those amongst us who really see ourselves as spiritual seekers, who see ourselves as those who take spiritual life seriously. What are the ways this kind of escape can occur in our lives? And oftentimes, almost always, for those of us who are serious in spiritual life, the escape can come in very unconscious ways. Apparently, in ways that seem very justifiable. In the Buddhist tradition, they sometimes tell a story. And the story goes like this, that there was one teacher, one Buddhist teacher, the monk, and he had 5 novices, 5 Buddhist monks who had joined the monastery. And one day he asked them, he gave them an assignment. He said, I want you to go to some monastery, which was some distance away. And I want you, it's good for you, I want you to do practice intense contemplation for X number of months, so 6 months or a year. And this is what I want you to do. Don't get distracted. I want you to walk from this monastery to the other one, and which involved actually probably a month or 2 of walking. It was pretty distant monastery. So even when you are going to that place, try to remain mindful, remain focused on your ideal, reach that place, do the practices, and come back to me after a year. Don't get distracted. So they all bowed out to him, and they started walking towards the monastery. And then we read that their experiences as they were continuing on this long walk towards their destination. So after a few days, they reached one village. And it turned out that that village had a temple, a Buddhist temple. There was a temple of Buddha, and they needed a priest to carry on. The priest had just died, and there wasn't anyone in the village who could take on the responsibility. And they were looking. And so when these monks passed by, they said, the monks wanted to stay overnight at the temple, and they found the priest is dead. Who is going to do all the services there? So one of these monks said, this is an important work, because the temple needs someone to carry on the service, otherwise people here are going to suffer, and I think I'll stay here and help these people out, and that's important. And the other said, but our teacher has told us to not get distracted, to go straight. But he said, no, I understand that, I recognize it, but this is important. So I'm going to. So one of the monks then stays back in that village and becomes a priest in that temple. The remaining 4 continue to walk, and after a few days they come to a small kind of a kingdom, a local king. Most of those olden days, in those days in India especially, it wasn't like a one nation state as we see today. There were all these several hundred, probably in thousands, small kingdoms, small and big. So they passed through one small kingdom, and the king was getting old, and he had a princess, and then these monks met him. The king said, I'm really worried about this kingdom because I don't have any heir other than my daughter, and I'm getting old, and this people are going to suffer if they don't have a good leader. So I want someone to take that responsibility. So one among these monks said, I will be here. It's very important that people don't suffer, that they need a good leader, otherwise it's going to be a lot of suffering until. So the monk stays back, marries that princess, becomes the king, and in order to help the people and see that the people don't suffer. So then the remaining 3 monks continue. Then after another few days, they reach another one village, and then we read that there they see one little girl. She was an orphan. She was suffering extremely ill, no one to take care of her, and hungry, almost dying of hunger. And so they said, one of the monks said, it's heartless for us just to kind of just go and not care for her. So one of them said, I'm going to stay back and take care of this poor child here, and nurse her to health, and then look after her, because she doesn't have anybody. So I kind of become her, I'll adopt her as my daughter and stay here. And so he stays there. And then they continue, the remaining 2 monks continue walking, and then finally they reach one more village, and then they see that that village is completely gone away from the path of religion. They didn't have any temple. They were very materialistic, very worldly. And then one of the monks says, I'm going to bring these people back on the right path, because that's what the Buddha would want me to do. And so he stays back again. And then finally we read only one of them reaches that final goal and then carries out, does the practices. Now the whole moral of this story is, I mean, if you read the original, I read it several years ago, so I don't even remember where I read this. But it was very beautifully described with pretty great details. Now the moral is this, that apparently even good work can be very self-destructive if it takes us away from the ideal. And that's the dilemma that, well, the story, of course, is dealing with monks and monasteries, but this is really a dilemma for all spiritual seekers. And it is this, that if we have a certain schedule for our spiritual practice, now clearly, in our daily life, there will be other commitments. There will be occasions when you will not be able to do your regular prayer, meditation at a time that you would like to do, or at a time that you are accustomed to doing. And that's okay. It's not, we are not machines that every day at the same time we can do it. As far as possible, of course, it's very helpful to have some kind of a schedule. But at the same time, we need to be flexible enough to recognize that there would be times, there would be occasions, justifiable occasions, when we will not be able to keep those times. Understandable, perfectly okay. The challenge is this: which of those times when we choose to be flexible really need our flexibility? I think that's the major challenge. And that's where really we need to examine ourselves. That how often do we put off or postpone our daily practice of prayer or meditation? Oh, I can't do this now because I need to do this, or I need to do that. At that time, you need to just go back and say, is it really that important that I really need to give up my practice in order to do this? Or whether that can wait. I mean, it's not as if, I mean, how many of us meditate for 4 hours? It's like, oh, that's so important that it cannot be done after 4 hours. If many of us are doing it for a few minutes, we can still ask ourselves, is whatever it is that is taking me away from my practice, is it so important that it cannot wait for a few minutes? So that's the message that comes to us, that even apparently good things, so whatever these monks stopped by the different villages, that they were not really doing it with anything bad or immoral. In fact, all of them were pretty good intention things, something that we would appreciate, something that really needs to be done. But what it also means is sometimes even good things, good intentions can take us away. And so we need to ask, as I've often mentioned in other contexts, our desire to help other people, our desire to solve other people's problem. Again, it's wonderful. We must, of course, help others. But also, occasionally at least, we need to look in our heart and say, what is it that motivates me to help other people? What is it that motivates me to engage myself in helping other people solve their problems? Sometimes we might discover, if we look deeply in our heart, that our aggressive desire to help others may not necessarily be completely selfless. There might be, not always, but there well might be that I want to keep myself busy with other people's problems because I don't want to deal with my own problems. I want to go and help others because I find that if I look at the things that I can help myself with, I just don't want to deal with it. So even, again, helping others is a great thing. But helping others as a way of escaping from oneself, escaping from one's own duties and responsibilities, there's a problem there. And so that is something that we need to think about. The second reason that sometimes we try to escape from God is that God can be sometimes very unbearable. Think about it this way. We know that we need oxygen for survival. Of course we need oxygen. But at the same time, we know that the oxygen in atmosphere is, how much is it, like 21%, 20%? And then 78, or it's my years ago, my school science knowledge. So I think as a lot of this, the oxygen that we have is kind of tempered or covered by a lot of other gases. There's nitrogen. And now, we will not be able to bear 100%. You just put your, just given a mask, if you're given like just 100% oxygen, it will be unbearable. So we need oxygen, but not so much oxygen. We need oxygen kind of mixed up with other things. Now sometimes being in the presence of God might be like, oh, that's too much. I like good things, but not so good things. And of course, you're familiar with that story Ramakrishna used to tell about a fisherwoman who couldn't return home that night because of a storm. She had to take shelter in this, the flower seller's home, and then they just put her up at night in that room in which flowers are kept. And she just couldn't sleep because of the fragrance of the flowers was unbearable. And then finally, we see that this basket she had in which this fish were kept, she just sprinkles a little water and it puts that basket over her head, and that smell of that fish, the old, maybe some of it rotting, then she sleeps, had a very good sound sleep. But the fragrance of flowers was unbearable. Now that story again is told to show that when we are accustomed to a certain kind of an environment, then even a better environment, even more nourishing, more healthy environment can become unbearable. So that is something that can happen. We see that also in the Gita, for instance, in the 11th chapter of the Gita, when Arjuna was granted this big cosmic form through the grace of Krishna, which was great, wonderful, and he is awestruck and wonderful. But after a few minutes, Arjuna has had too much of it. And then Arjuna says, could you please take it back? I just want to see you the way you were before. It was just too much, more than he could absorb, more than he could digest. We see that again in the Kalpataru event in Ramakrishna's life, that when he blessed the number of devotees who came and met him on that 1st of January in 1886, a few of them, one of them specifically, whose consciousness were raised to such high level that he goes home and he's just seeing the divine everywhere. It was so overpowering that after 3 days he comes to Ramakrishna and says, please take it back. I'm not able to live my normal life. I'm just thinking of God all the time. So recognize this. While we would all like to feel connected with God, connection with God can become unbearable, or too much, more than we can absorb, more than we can digest, more than we can hold. And so even as we seek for higher spiritual experiences, it might be better to alongside seek the capacity to hold that experience. Because otherwise, the experience will come, and if you can't hold it, it's gone. Same thing about God's grace. Once Holy Mother said, Sharda Devi, she said that devotees come and say, oh, please let us have God's grace, or please shower your grace, or please do something that God's grace will come to us. And then Mother says, she says, what will grace do? Grace comes and goes. You don't even know it's come. So again, unless we are sensitive enough to recognize the presence of grace in our lives, grace itself can't do anything. In other words, it's not as if God occasionally sends his or her grace in our lives and we just have to kind of keep on waiting. The truth is that, as Ramakrishna taught, that and he put it this way, he said the breeze or the wind of God's grace is always blowing. It's always around us. If we hoist our sails, we'll be able to catch that wind. So grace is not something that comes and goes, Grace is always present. If we are able to open our hearts, we will be able to receive it. And finally, one of the reasons that we unconsciously seek escape from God is because our faith in God hasn't become strengthened yet. We know from our own experience that our faith has its ups and downs. There are moments in a day, or there are moments in a life, or sometimes in a year, we feel very strong in our faith in God. We just kind of feel it inside. But there are also, and every spiritual seeker passes through it, there are also dry periods. There are also periods when no matter how much you try, you just don't feel. The prayer becomes dry and mechanical, meditation becomes dry and mechanical, and there are days when both of them are wonderful. And so it has, and Holy Mother used to sometimes say that just as the moon has its phases, so there is the full moon, there is the new moon. Sometimes the moon is bigger, sometimes the moon is smaller. The mind is also a little bit like that. So there are times when the mind is very receptive. There are times when the mind just resists. And because of these ups and downs, when the mind is in that down phase, when we are passing through kind of a dry patch, it is at such times that we tend to find our consolation, our security in things other than our spiritual life. And at such times, we will see that our spiritual practice suffers. And so one of the things that we need is that extra exercise of our willpower during such dry periods. When things are great, when you're kind of feeling your heart filled with God's love, pretty much goes smoothly. But that's not so much challenging. The challenging are those dry periods. And it's at those periods there is a great temptation to say, oh, I just don't feel like meditating now. Let me just kind of skip it for a few days. And then when I feel good, I will start again. And that's the problem. In fact, it's those dry periods that we must actually even push ourselves harder. And if we do this, we will see that these ups and downs, while they may continue in our lives, the duration becomes different. Then the ups will be longer than the downs. And then, of course, as we go closer and closer to God, the ups will remain longer. And who is an enlightened being? Who is always up. So the downs are completely eliminated. So that's basically how it happens. So how do we simply, based on whatever we have seen so far, how do we then prevent the urge to escape from this in our lives? The first step, obviously, is to try to live as much as possible consciously. So much of the life, we are just kind of dragged along by what is sometimes called the unconscious stream of life. Think about it this way. The number of things that we do from the time we wake up till the time we go to bed, how many of those things we just do it? We just do it because, well, that's what everyone does. That's what I have been doing all my life, and I'm doing it. So we just kind of lead a very instinctual life. Now, in itself, there's nothing bad about just living through our instincts, but recognize also that, at least from our very human perspective, we see that we are kind of more evolved than animals. But animals lived purely through instincts, at least mostly, or at least the very human-centric view of life. Some of the animals may not agree with this, but at least the way we see it, it just looks as if their life is guided more by their biological urges and by instincts, not so much through analysis. Now, we can always overanalyze and overthink everything. That's another problem. But we know that we have the power within us to consider every thought, every action, every word, and we have the choice to either say yes or no, to do it or not do it. Now, if we don't exercise that choice, we are just living in a very unconscious way. We are just doing whatever the body and mind make me do, I do. But consciously would mean that I just pause. And that pause could be as short as a half a second or nanosecond. But you would know. If you're doing something, you know why you're doing it. If you're not doing something, you know why you're not doing it. And so therefore, why questioning is very helpful in spiritual life. In the beginning, it might seem a bit cumbersome, like how often am I going to ask myself why? Yes, it's true. If you have never done it before, and when you start doing it, it's going to be a little of a bother. But try to ask yourself that question as often as you can. Why? And be honest with whatever answer your mind gives you. And one way of simplifying our life is, if you ask yourself why am I thinking this way? Why am I saying these things? Why am I doing this? And if your mind tells you that there is no any good reason why you are thinking this way or saying this way or doing this way, that nothing good is going to come of it, either to you or to others around you, if that's what the answer you get from within, then you can be pretty sure that you probably shouldn't be thinking that way, or shouldn't be saying that, or shouldn't be doing it. With that, we'll be able to eliminate a lot of our useless thinking, useless speaking, and useless actions. And we'll have a lot more time and energy at our disposal to do what needs to be done. So living consciously is very helpful. And this is an interesting thing. As I said in the beginning, asking this why often might be a little of a bother. But if you do it consistently, you will see that that becomes then your default way of living. And then you no longer even feel it. It's not like every time, why? You're not really saying that. But you automatically will become conscious. And then we will tend to make fewer mistakes in life. The choices we make will be better. We will have fewer reasons to regret in our life if we live consciously. Second thing, which is connected with the first, is try to examine every time you feel the urge to escape from what needs to be done in your daily life, but especially in your spiritual life. If you have a spiritual practice, if you have a time to pray, to meditate, to study, and if sometimes you feel like, okay, I can't do it now, or I don't want to do it now, just examine and say, is the reason that is taking me away from my practice justifiable? Is it something that cannot wait? Is it something more important than this? And oftentimes we might discover, if we really ask that question to ourselves, that whatever it is that I thought needs to be done now can wait for a few minutes. I don't necessarily have to change my spiritual practice schedule in order to do that. But again, there might be some occasions when a change might be needed. So it's a judgment that we all have to see. Sometimes there will be things that want us to take care of, and we should do it, not be so tight bound in our own prayer and meditation schedule, but also make sure that it's really that important and not something that I'm doing it just because meditation is so boring. So just that's the second thing to do. And finally, identifying our inherent weaknesses. If we ask a why question often, if we try to live consciously, every one of us, with a little bit of self-examination, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, as they say. If we are truly honest with ourselves, it's not too difficult to know what our weaknesses are and what our strengths are. And that's important, since if we see ourselves as pretty good judge of other people, then prove it by being a pretty good judge of your own self. Sometimes judging oneself can be very difficult. We either try to overestimate ourselves or underestimate ourselves. But neither is necessary. We neither need to suffer from a superiority complex or an inferiority complex. Just know who you are. As that favorite story of mine that I sometimes mention, that here is this one person who was thinking he had suffering from inferiority complex. So he had this test taken by a therapist, and then later was called a week later for the results. And the therapist says that, well, I examined all the tests, and I have a good news for you, that you are not suffering from inferiority complex. You are inferior. So again, it's good for us to just know. And there is not a single person in the world who can say that I have no weaknesses. There is not a single person in the world who can say I have no strengths. The reality is that every one of us, there are things that we are good at, there are things that we are not good at. And life is pretty simple. If you can identify that, all you need to do is the things that you are good at, see that you don't lose them, hold on to them. The things that you are not good at, well, try to be good at them. So identify the weaknesses and work on them. In fact, it is said that if we identify our weaknesses and even try one weakness per year, in 1 year, you say, this is the list of my, say, 5 major weaknesses. And you have a 5-year plan. So 1 year said, I'm going to work, even if you try that, even if you don't do it perfectly, even if it is so long as you are sincere, you will find a very qualitative change in your life. And that's how transformations occur. Transformations don't come simply by reading books or attending lectures. Transformation comes through actually identifying what's going on and trying to eliminate the shortcomings and weaknesses that we have. We read in Genesis 1:27 that, so God created mankind in his own image. In his own image, God created them. He created them male and female. Now, what does this mean? When I read this, I feel that God actually, well, although it's put in the text, God created us in his image. When I read it, I just feel as if God wants to create us in his image. And the reason, well, we would say, well, nothing is impossible for God. But I think in some respects, we make things impossible for God. In some ways, I think we are more powerful than God in some ways. It's like this. You can think of God as a sculptor. And every one of us is a block of marble. Now, when a sculptor is sculpting a beautiful image of a piece of marble, what does that marble piece have to do? Really nothing. Just be there. Just be a marble piece and don't do anything. Now, what if that the piece of stone, acquires a mind and says, I'm just going to do tap dancing. I'm just going to go dance around. Now, that's really going to make the sculptor's job very difficult. You see, if you're just going to sculpt and the stone starts moving and rocking here and there, that's going to be difficult. And that's really the problem. It's our own ambitions, it's our own ego, it's our own agendas, which really make us do things that we shouldn't do, make us choose things that we shouldn't choose. And when God is trying to kind of sculpt a beautiful image, we are actually obstructing God's work. And we don't have to, the only way we can help God is really don't do anything, just be. Now that's difficult. And one way is to just get out of the way, get your eye out of the way. So long as my little ego has this, finally, it's what I'm really saying is this. Those of us who take spiritual life seriously know and believe that ultimately it's God's will that is going to prevail. Ultimately, whatever God plans, that's what is going to happen. Now, that does not prevent us, or that doesn't really stop us from making our own plans. All of us have plans about our life. Some of us have plans for the whole world. We have our own little will. I want to do this, I want to do that. This is what I want to do. Nothing wrong in having all these plans and, of course, exercising our will. But recognize, ultimately, in spite of our little will, in spite of our little plan, we believe that God's plan and God's will is going to go into, well, that's what's going to happen. And so one of the things that we can do is pray that let my little will be merged in God's will. That let my plan be not so radically different from God's plan that I'm just going to be frustrated. So that's what we can do. And that's what identifying our weaknesses, living consciously will help us do. Because then it will be difficult for us to do anything, to think in a way or to say things which will be against our own self-interest. The beauty is this, all of us do things out of self-interest, and that's natural. Because we all want to be happy, we don't want to be miserable. So we think, we say, we do things which we hope will make us happy, which will not make us. At the same time, a lot of us do suffer, a lot of us do experience pain. Not always, we may want to blame others for it, but we will see that we have contributed to in some way. Because of the way we think, the way we behave, the way we relate to other people, the way we do our work, we contribute towards the pain that we experience. And therefore, if we just try that, let me identify my weaknesses and try not to do it, we will see that our will come more in harmony with the divine will. Our plan will not be radically different from the divine plan. And so these are some of the thoughts that come to mind about our relationship with God, about how we want to be near God, and how unconsciously a part of us wants to kind of keep that distance. So a lot to think about, and I would encourage you to ponder on some of these thoughts. And obviously, no one can touch on every aspect related to the topic, but you may have some ideas that were not raised this morning, but do think about it, and yeah, let's all try to think about it and try not escaping from our own selves, not escaping from God, because that's how real peace and fulfillment can be found in life. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. We bow down to Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. Next Sunday, our topic will be to do or not to do. Again, inspired by Shakespeare. On Tuesday, Tuesday and Saturday, we'll have our Arati and meditation as usual at 6 o'clock. On Wednesday, we will have the Gita. We are studying chapter 13 at 7:30. The Gita class and the Satsang are also being streamed live, as you know. On Tuesday, for those of you who come for the Arati and meditation, please check the center's web, because I hear there's going to be snow. I don't know yet how bad the commute will be. So if it's going to be really very bad, then we might cancel it. I'm not canceling it now, but we might do so. So if you are intending to come on Tuesday, please check the center's website or the calendar. We'll also generally, we put it announce on the television, and wherever it's possible, we'll try to do it. So make sure that if you're coming and if this commute is bad, please find out before coming on Tuesday. That's it. Let's conclude with a prayer on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.